welcoming Steve Halverson.
Jill, thank you for that warm and overly generous introduction. I'll try not to cause any doubt to be cast on all that, but I appreciate that. And Karen, I appreciate you having me here and introducing me a bit more to Meninak. At the Haskell Building, we have a chance to see you every December, and we're grateful to have you there. And I remember seeing the banner for the meeting that we host there, and spoke with my partner Preston Haskell, who is a long time, I think maybe a 40-year member of this organization. So he gave me some background, and it really is an honor to be here. I'm aware of some of the other speakers that you've had, and I approached the podium with some trepidation. I don't know that I quite measure to that quality standard, but I'll do my best to quit myself. When Karen first asked me to speak, Karen is nothing if not robust in her requests of people. She said, "What would you like me to talk about?" She said, "Oh, just stuff, like maybe pension reform and the city's budget and education and crime, anything else you can think of, and maybe about what the vision for the city ought to be." So that was a tall order, which I won't pretend to fulfill, but it did cause me to start thinking about some of this. And actually, it's a thought process that's engaged me for some number of years about what does it take to build great communities. So I've had a chance to think about that over the years, and in particular the last 2 years, where I've had the chance to chair the Jacksonville Civic Council, and I'm really pleased to see our executive director, Jean Miller, here. I will disclaim any inference that I hand-selected her name for the award certificate. That was just good luck. And Jill, many of the things you mentioned as accolades you could have dispensed with, but one I would have added was of all my accomplishments in the career, one I'm proudest of is actually hiring Jean Miller as the executive director. She's a terrific leader. I'm glad she's here as a guest with you today. Jean, thank you for what you do for our community. I can't ever resist a chance to embarrass her in public, so I've now accomplished that. Could you hand me that? The thing that the band, not the
yes.
song. Please, so this idea of what what makes cities great is one that's engagement. I mentioned, Preston, I moved here in 1999, late 99, and joined the Haskell Company at that time. And I think my first week here, I had a chance to have lunch with Preston and his younger brother, Wyatt Haskell. Now, all of you know Preston. You may not, probably don't know his younger brother, Wyatt, but if you had met him, you would only conclude that life is unfair. No family should have that much intellectual horsepower in one spot. Preston is preternaturally gifted, so is his brother, and to be in the presence of both of them makes for a really long lunch. And Wyatt asked me, he'd noticed that I was sort of an itinerant business person who lived in Washington, D.C., and Minneapolis and Denver and Los Angeles all before coming here. So he said, just to be provocative, I think, he said, what makes communities great? And the converse, what makes them not great? And we had a long lunch and discussion about that. Wyatt's conclusion was intellectual capital, that just smart people make great communities, and whatever you need to attract smart people was the right strategy. Not surprising coming from a really smart person with an even smarter older brother, but it caused me to start thinking about that question. What really does make for great communities? Why do some communities prosper and others decline? The usual reasons of the screen are that it's low taxes. Certainly nobody complains about low taxes. Natural resources. Most cities historically were located on rivers or oceanways or navigable ports and things. They took advantage of geography. Climate's always is always a plus, and we certainly enjoy a favorable climate here in Florida. Geography has its advantages, and natural resources and things like that. But I would submit that these things were historically important, and the current contexts are less so. Rather, I think what does matter and what really drives communities is this: it's communities that somehow develop an authentic and widely shared vision of themselves, of what they seek to be, why they seek to be it, what are the community aspirations. And they manage to form that, not in a political, at least not in an overtly political context, but in something that's more enduring and goes beyond 4-year terms or 8-year cycles. And they develop a picture of themselves that is bigger than themselves. And they evidence that by being willing to invest in that vision and do things that advance that. And the third thing is, I think about communities that I'm aware of, and in our business, which is it's a terrific business, but it costs to be in a lot of places. We've been in 44 states, and you have a chance to be in a lot of places and engage with important civic leaders all over. So you have a perspective on this, but in each case, communities that were really great had civic leaders like the Meninak group and people that it represents step forward and be engaged and care and act like they care in that community. And that, I don't say that lightly. That's not to be taken for granted. It does not happen everywhere. In fact, it doesn't happen all that many places. But in great cities, it does. There's this quote at the bottom that you can read from Richard, Florida. Talks about having a place that engages. It talks about engagement, quality of life, engaging what he calls creative class. And despite his felicitous last name, Richard Florida is not from Florida. He was born in New Jersey and educated at Columbia and teaches at the University of Toronto. And he wrote a provocative work that is pertinent to some current conversations here in Jacksonville. And it's called The Rise of the Creative Class, and he asserts in that book that there is a positive correlation between a community's receptivity to and population of gay and lesbian people and creativity, economic well-being, and job creation. And it's, as you might expect, provocative and controversial, but it's informative of current conversations about our human rights ordinance. And it's a thesis that I don't pretend to have studied the factual correlation. It's a thesis I accept, that communities that are inviting and welcoming and warm to all people generally prosper and do better than those that don't. A couple of illustrations on this, and I won't belabor this map a bit, but pick some communities. And this is going to be we're going to take a brief tour of stops going from west to east. Portland, Oregon is a really interesting city to me, and I've spent some time there back in the early '80s, and Portland undertook an effort to sort of this idea of visioning and defining itself, and it's blessed with a lot of things. It's a beautiful place, although it rains a lot. There's mountains and it's a great place. It has a culture that is sort of, some people call granola crunchy. It's pretty liberal, pretty young, very educated on that, and they have some educational institutions not far from there. But it was sort of a mishmash, and they decided they wanted to have, and it's also sort of, I would characterize it as a collectivist kind of an attitude. They think a lot about working in community with each other. And so they undertook an effort to rebuild their community. They did an interesting thing. They decided they wanted to be tight, dense, and cooperative and collaborative. And they accomplished that by essentially creating a beltway, circumference around the city, and virtually froze all development outside of that. That forced infill. You see Portland now, it's very dense. There's high property values as a consequence of that. But when you're outside of Portland, you're outside of Portland. There isn't much outside of it. And they coupled that with a then state-of-the-art light rail transit system, working people to get around this very walkable, very dense urban environment. And they built a picture of a city that's quite prosperous, quite affluent, very interactive, and it's been an absolute magnet for bright young people. It is one of the highest percentages of college graduates, and in fact they have a hard time finding jobs to accommodate all these overeducated people, but it's got a terrific feel to it. Does not have a particularly great, it's got a port, but it doesn't have an ocean there. It's not too far away, but Portland's not not really an ocean city. So it's got a lot of disadvantages, but they made a picture of themselves that made sense to the people of Portland, and has an extremely high satisfaction rate. People that live there can't imagine living anyplace else. Denver, I spent some time there. I moved there in 1989, which was the worst possible time to go there. The city, again, sort of things to repeat themselves. So the then current shale oil industry had collapsed, and Denver was a picture of misery. See-through buildings downtown that had literally no occupants in some cases. Jobs, the vans that were leaving the city in all directions. You couldn't hardly count them. It had high unemployment, low income. The place was a mess. They had a mayor I got to know pretty well named Federico Pena at the time, Democratic mayor, and he had one speech. It's called "Imagine a Great City," and he painted this picture of Imagine a Great City. It's a world-class airport which didn't exist at that time, that had solved their transportation. They called it the mousetrap, the intersection of I-70 and I-25, which made the city impassable. And he said, "Imagine Grace is a world-class art museum and 4 professional sports team and a great cultural center." The man was nuts. Nobody could take any of that seriously in the context of where Denver was, but he persisted in that vision, and he kept repeating it. And the joke was, if there was 3 people having oatmeal for breakfast, and the mayor happened, he would launch into his "Imagine a Great City" speech, and that was almost literally true. But bit by bit, that vision came true. They built, at that time, the first new airport since Dallas-Fort Worth 25 years earlier. It was a spec airport, it had no underlying leases. It was an incredibly gutsy thing to do. It built a world-class art museum, established a cultural facilities district, attracted Major League, they had basketball and football. They attracted hockey to that and became a legitimate hockey and baseball, legitimate 4 sports town, and Denver took off. They brag about their development downtown, their riverfront development, the Lower Platte River. And for those who've been in Denver, it's an interesting river because it has no water in it, and hasn't for over 100 years. But they're really proud of it. And they built art museums, and they got art galleries and loft apartments and microbreweries along a dry riverbed, and brag about it. Contrast that to the river we have here. Anyway, Denver figured out a picture for itself. Oklahoma City, I'll try to be short, but in 1992, Oklahoma City was one of 2 finalists with Indianapolis for a very, very large maintenance hangar for United Airlines. It was going to be transformative community, and they didn't win it. It went to Indianapolis instead. And United was refreshingly blunt and candid in saying why. They said, "We can't imagine we want to live here." And they didn't want their people to have to live there, and that shook the city to its core. At that time, Oklahoma City had, the then Mayor Richard Nordick said, we hadn't invested in ourselves, our buildings, we hadn't been maintaining, we hadn't done much of anything. The urban environment wasn't walkable, and there wasn't anything to it, and they said, they're probably right. They passed a plan they called Pay As You Go, which was not a very attractive name, but it was a 1 cent sales tax that invested in the core of the city. So we're going to make this city different. And they built infrastructure, they repaired things, they invested in attracting cultural things and sports and things that made a difference on that. And the community passed it, so we're not going to be an unattractive place that nobody wants to come to or jobs won't relocate to. And it was met with such enthusiasm. It was reapproved in 2001 when the tax expired. And at that point, they made a much better city, but the then current mayor, which is not Mayor Nordick, noted, said, we still have a problem with wellness and fitness. They had made the list as one of America's fattest cities, not a list you want to be on. And so they concluded it was a great city as long as you had a car. And so they tried to make urban more walkable. They built the Brickyard, which was a renovation of an old industrial space, but made the city walkable, made pedestrian-friendly and bike-friendly routes. And now, Oklahoma City, which has no noticeable natural advantages at all, none. But now it's a great city, and it's routinely on best of this, best of that kind of list. Austin, Texas, so be sure this similar kind of a story that made that you more familiar with that. Nashville, Tennessee, a city that I likened to Jacksonville 25 years ago, didn't have a lot going for it. Go to Nashville now. Civic investment, they've got terrific public venues. They built on natural advantage of that city. They're a music culture that they expanded and exploited. Built in Nashville, having a first-rate university, Vanderbilt University, and Nashville is on everybody's list of hot cities right now. All of these things, it's just to illustrate the possible. You don't need to be Chicago or New York or Paris or London, but these are normal cities, not particularly distinguished or blessed compared to Jacksonville, but what they have in common is they built a picture of themselves that grew out of their natural assets and abilities, and had the perseverance to execute in that vision, and they became great cities as a result of that. That doesn't happen by political leadership alone, as engaged civic leadership and a courage to invest in the long-term future. So, Jacksonville, well, this is a wonderful, actually, Gene helped me find this, from Rebecca Ryan. Planners plan cities, oops, this thing is planners plan cities, mayors manage them, but only citizens can love their cities. And I really think that captures something important. In the end, fundamentally, great cities reside and result from civic leadership. So Jacksonville has its issues. We recited some of those. We've got a downtown that struggles, a pension reform that's unaccomplished. You could read the list there. You've had other speakers talk about some of these topics. I don't want to go through that or belabor that over much, but rather to take this and try to contextualize this in a picture of what Jacksonville might be in the future. And I just offer it to be provocative more than anything else. All business people sort of start with sort of analysis. What do you have as assets? What's the current environment? This is my list. I think Jacksonville starts with some real competitive advantages, and you can see the list. We've got climate, recreation, competitive low-cost tax structure, beaches, an enormously attractive, a beautiful river. I'd never been to Jacksonville before coming to Haskell, and it was not a river. Remember, I lived in a town that had a river with no water, and my jaw dropped when I saw the St. Johns River for the first time. I said, our office went right on it. It was extraordinary, huge advantage, and one that's been largely not capitalized on. A culture of family and faith, and that isn't just a trite line. That's really important, and that is, and we should look at that as a community asset. I came from Los Angeles, this is very anecdotal. I came from Los Angeles, and as I tried to persuade my quite reluctant wife and even more reluctant adolescent daughter to move from Los Angeles to Jacksonville. So my wife, with great skepticism, came to town and looking around the place. One of the things that really struck her, she said, there's a lot of churches here. And that was, I wouldn't say it was dispositive, but it's highly influential in her willingness to want to come to a community. And we had talked about raising an adolescent daughter in what I'd characterize as the morally ambiguous Los Angeles. And I don't want to demean, it's a great city, and for two adults, it was a wonderful place. But it matters. I think you know what I mean. It's just different. And we felt a lot more secure raising a girl in Jacksonville than we ever would have in Los Angeles. And having means can't change culture. You're still surrounded by what's surrounded. So this is an asset of consequence to this city. We also have a history of engaged civic leaders. I am one of the things that struck me most in my time here, the 15 plus years in Jacksonville, is how much people care about this place and how much they're willing to invest in its future. Personally, philanthropically, their time, emotionally, and getting out there, and that is an enormous asset. And balance sheets cover financial assets and liabilities, but they miss the important things. That's one of the important things that balance sheets will never capture. So you've had people talk about pensions. I won't belabor it, but I will offer these observations. And Jean's forgot more about this now than probably I'll know. She lives this every day. But my takeaways, and I'm speaking for myself, not the Civic Council. I wouldn't burden her with my thoughts. But here's my take, and I spent a lot of time on this. First, don't believe the hype. This is solvable. We can fix this problem. It's big, it's nasty, it's brutish, but it is solvable. As a general matter, I would assert that the problem isn't that the benefits are so rich. We don't have, with some anomalies, multi-millionaire public servants roaming around the streets because of their pensions. Pensions have like $30,000 or something like that. And they don't pay into Social Security, they don't get Social Security, so you got to factor that into the equation. But this is a solvable problem. And it's less about how much the pensions are than how those costs are shared. The current proposal working its way through the City Council does a good job of lowering the cost for future employees. Does a bad job of doing much of anything about current employees, and that's partly because it's not legally permissible, nor I would suggest morally appropriate, trying to take away somebody's pension. There's a finite number of addressable concerns, but they didn't do a very good job of addressing what could be addressed, things like the drop and the cost of living increase. Didn't do a very good job on that in my judgment. But in the context of the overall problem, which is a $1.6 billion unfunded liability present value, those matters are relatively inconsequential. The real issue, to me, is how costs are shared and how we pay for this accumulated. Think of it as your credit card where you went crazy on it for 10 years, then you woke up and said, I've got this debt and it's got a high rate of interest, we better change our lifestyle and accomplish it. I think that's a reasonable analogy. The big issue, as I said, is rethinking on cost sharing. Historically, pensions were paid primarily by us, taxpayers, for the benefit of the few. 70 or almost 80%. That is unsustainable by definition. It needs to be more, and is closer to a 50-50 share, where the city pays roughly half, and their half are covered through a form of tax called the chapter funds, which I won't belabor, but it's a tax that you paid on insurance policies, and direct contributions from employees. So they're invested relatively more heavily in their own retirement. And the new plan gets something like this pie chart, which I would assert is more sustainable. But it masks and obscures the real issue behind that, and that's funding. This is just a chart. This comes out of the city's budget office that shows projections on revenues versus expenses. And you can see it's not a pretty picture on that. Currently, because we're obliged to, we've always had revenues matching expenses in one formula because it's necessary, a lesson you wish the federal government could undertake. Going ahead, that won't happen, at least not automatically. You can see that the expenses escalate far more dramatically than anticipated growth in revenue. So that is a picture of pain and misery that needs to be